Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire of 1911 provided a view for the public to the unsafe conditions for the working class, which changed society's opinions on the rights of the working class.
Historical background.
Shirtwaist is a blouse that has long shirt sleeves, a center front closure, and a collar. Shirtwaists were very popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Although shirtwaists were one of the biggest trends in the early 1900s, they began to lose popularity in the mid-1900s. In fall of 1909, workers' unions such as the International Ladies Garment Workers Union and the National Women's Trade Union League of America began planning strikes. They were hoping to gain more sanitary conditions in the factories, a 20% pay raise from their $9 to $16 per week, 52-hour work weeks, and extra pay for overtime. Most of the workers were immigrant women and girls. The strikes, now called the Uprising of 20,000, lasted from November 1909 to February 1910. Over 20,000 factory workers walked out within the first 2 days. Over 70 of the smaller factories had come to an agreement with the women by the first 48 hours. In 1 month's time, most of the mid-sized factories had given in as well. The big factories, which included the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, were the only ones that had yet to consent to the wishes of the women. The factory owners hired thugs to beat the protesters. 19-year-old Clara Lemlich, who was one of the leaders of the strike, was severely beaten by thugs, leaving her with several broken ribs. She had been arrested 17 times before the strikes began. Eventually, the majority of the larger factories subsided to the women. However, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory did not make any changes. When the Ash Building, the location of the factory, was built, it was deemed fireproof. The architect was granted permission to construct 2 staircases instead of 3. He attached 1 cast iron fire escape that did not even touch the ground, but it was considered a 3rd staircase. Although there were many sprinkler systems available for installation, they were said to be too expensive for them to put in. Most of the doors opened into the workspace, which made it more difficult to escape with a large crowd. On Saturday, March 25, 1911, at 4:45 p.m., one of the largest fires in the history of America took place. No one knows exactly how the fire started, but it is known that it started on the 8th floor. The 500 employees of Isaac Harris's and Max Planck's company were just beginning to pack their belongings and leave when the fire started. The people on the 8th floor attempted to extinguish the fire with a few buckets of water and a partially rotted hose. The flames quickly spread to the 9th and 10th floors. The doors on the bottom floor, which were the only good chance of escaping the fire, were locked because the factory owners did not want the workers to leave without permission or steal the shirtwaists. Some others on the higher floors tried to use the fire escape. Less than 20 people were able to use it when it twisted and fell apart. Many of the victims attempted to jump from the windows onto the nets that the firemen had brought, but they ripped like paper. Their last chance was to make the 80-foot jump from the previously overcrowded building onto the sidewalk in order to escape from the flames. Some of them even went through the sidewalk. Over 60 of the women jumped to their deaths. United Press reporter William G. Shepard was the first eyewitness. The longest ladder that the firemen had only reached to the 6th floor. Their hoses were making a poor attempt to douse the flames. The water that flowed back down was red with blood.
When the fire was put out at last, firefighters found heaps of bodies clustered around the elevator shafts as well as the air shaft. 139 bodies were identified within a week. The funeral was held at Evergreen Cemetery on April 2nd, and over 120,000 people attended. Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish ceremonies were held since the religion could not be determined for many of the victims. In 2011, independent researcher Michael Hirsch managed to identify the remaining 7 bodies.
There were people who struggled and made a success and then exploited other people, yeah.
I'm sure they looked around their factory and said, these people have no idea how good they have it.
Warning: graphic content.
Shortly after the fire on April 5, 1911, over 100,000 people joined in a procession up Fifth Avenue to express the community's grief. Not long before the funeral procession, a mass meeting of religious leaders, teachers, civic leaders, and others gathered at the Metropolitan Opera. At the meeting, the Committee on Safety was created, which collected and provided information on fire safety and became a powerful political force. The committee lobbied for a thorough investigation and won the support of Robert Wagner, a state Senate Majority Leader, and Alfred E. Smith. Both men introduced bills which then became laws on June 30, 1911, which created the Factory Investigating Commission. The commission was to investigate the conditions under which manufacturing is carried on. This gave the Factory Investigating Commission unusual powers and scope. At first, the investigation was limited to the 9 largest cities in New York, but the restriction was later lifted. Although the commission was created to last 1 year, it was extended to 4 years. According to Francis Perkins, the flames of the Triangle Fire were magnified into a torch that lit up the industrial scene. On October 10, 1911, at a public hearing, General Counsel Abram Elkis brought up the fact that the fire had brought to public attention the dangers to workers, not just from fire, but also from the less obvious but greater menace of unsanitary conditions. Between 1911 and 1912, the Commission drafted 26 bills designed to appeal to the government to take action to protect the health of the working people. The support of state legislators Robert Wagner and Alfred E. Smith helped the bill's success, along with the newly elected Governor William Sulzer. Between 1912 and 1914, the Commission submitted 17 bills. Out of those 17, 13 of them became law. These 2 years marked its greatest legislative success. The laws included measures that would require more adequate factory ventilation, better fire safety efforts, among other articles. The Commission suffered, however, when Governor Sulzer was impeached in 1913. While the Commission was weakened, businesses began to protest the Commission's work, arguing that the Commission made outrageous charges and used inexperienced investigators. Employers began to denounce the new labor laws as costly, impractical, and unfair. Legislators who supported the industry introduced bills that would weaken the safety and health laws. 4 years after the fire, on March 26, 1915, a public meeting was held to oppose the bills that would weaken the Commission laws, called Ripper Bills. The protest was successful, and though many Ripper Bills passed, all but one were vetoed by the Governor Martin H. Glenn. A total of 20 laws were passed that provided stricter regulations regarding occupational health and safety regulations. The Commission had also encouraged a greater public awareness of the problems in the workplace. In 1919, New York achieved an industrial commission to set health and safety rules. Francis Perkins was a part of this commission. Years later, Francis Perkins would name the Factory Investigating Commission a turning point in American attitudes towards social responsibility.
Abraham put our father